The Breath of the Wild 2 trailers have shown us a lot of interesting things, most importantly of which is the fact that Ganondorf is back. We of course fought Calamity Ganon during the end of Breath of the Wild, but that was his wild, bestial form. What we see in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer is a very distinctively humanoid, probably Gerudo form of Ganon. And the fact we see him up and moving around in the second trailer means that he's probably playing an active role in the game, likely as the primary antagonist. But a couple things about the trailer raise an interesting conundrum. Is it possible that Breath of the Wild 2 will see Link kill Ganondorf? And not just in the standard way we've already seen before, but could it be that Breath of the Wild 2 will see the end of the reincarnation cycle, supposedly set in motion by Demise? Could Breath of the Wild 2 be gearing up to be the end of Ganondorf once and for all? And the more interesting question in my opinion, is this something we should even want? Let's talk about it. A couple things before we get started. We've finally hit 5,000 subscribers here on the channel, and thank you guys very much for that. My New Year's resolution was to hit 3,500 before the end of the year, and the sudden boost from that Twilight Princess video blew us well past that. We're halfway to 10,000 subscribers, which is really exciting. On that note, I decided to celebrate hitting 5K by opening a Patreon. We hit $10 a month in the first day, which is super cool. Aside from the general Discord and behind the scene rewards that people don't really care about, I have a unique spin on Patreon credits, which I know is the thing people do care about. Pledging $1 Canadian will get you into the parade, and you'll be able to design one Subrosian with your name underneath to take part in the parade, which will be shown in every video. And would you look at that, here comes the parade now. If you would like to join the parade, link is in the description. Before we get into things, a few words about naming convention. In this case, Ganon versus Ganondorf. It's always a bit tricky talking about what to call the figure that we see in the trailer, because somebody will always disagree with you, regardless of what you call him. Conventionally, we refer to this humanoid form as Ganondorf and his beastly form as Ganon. And while this seems like a hard and fast rule, it isn't even adhered to all the time by Nintendo. Ganondorf is still referred to as Ganon in certain instances in Ocarina of Time, like his castle being named Ganon's Castle, or Phantom Ganon having his name despite being a humanoid, and it gets downright messy in Wind Waker, where Ganon and Ganondorf are basically used interchangeably throughout the whole game. In Breath of the Wild, Urbosa refers to Ocarina of Time's incarnation as another form of Calamity Ganon, so it doesn't seem like the name Ganondorf has survived the annals of time. And as a result, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the humanoid that we'd normally refer to as Ganondorf ends up continuing to be called Ganon in Breath of the Wild 2. I'll be referring to the figure in the trailer as Ganon and previous incarnations as Ganondorf. As we know, at the end of Skyward Sword, the first game in the timeline, Demise supposedly used the last of his energy to lay a curse. My hate never perishes. It is born anew in a cycle with no end. Those like you, those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse. The curse serves to explain the never-ending reincarnation of Link, Zelda, and Ganon. There will always be a Ganon, and because of that, there will always be a Link and Zelda to stop him. Or will there always be? There is some thought in the community that Breath of the Wild 2 might see this eternal cycle come to an end. In Croton's excellent video on the topic, he talks about how the gap between appearances of Ganon seems to be growing, and that all three characters involved seem to be losing some of their connection to the primordial powers that originally benefited them. As Croton argues, Ganon seems to be growing less intelligent and more bestial as time passes. Zelda seems to be losing her potency in magic, being wholly unable to access her magic for most of her life up to the point of Breath of the Wild. Even Link suffers as the Master Sword becomes chipped and damaged in a way never really seen before. The first trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 brought on even more speculation around this topic. In the trailer, we seem to find Ganon's actual body. If you've watched QuestWithAaron's groundbreaking video on translation issues in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, or if you've hung around communities where the translation differences are discussed, you'd be aware that the Calamity Ganon we encounter in the first Breath of the Wild is not the actual Calamity Ganon. and is closer to a manifestation of his power, while his real body lays in resurrection. So when we see him come to life in the trailer, and we see Hyrule Castle lifted into the sky by Malice, we are seeing the actual power of Calamity Ganon. Some believe that this Ganon is not the Ganondorf we've seen in prior games, but that with the exception of Four Swords Adventures, this will be the first true new reincarnation of Demise. Other people naturally disagree with that, and if you want to see some arguments about why this could possibly be the Ganon that we see in Twilight Princess, I made a video about that a little while ago. Link is in the description. But for this video, we'll be assuming that this is a whole new Ganon. Combining the idea of the cycle beginning to fade with this being the true new incarnation, it stands to reason, according to some folks, that perhaps this is the moment where the cycle is broken once and for all. Link and Zelda will do battle with the source of Calamity Ganon, or perhaps better to say the actual Calamity Ganon, and they will kill him. The cycle will have faded to the point where he's not able to resurrect again, and the terror of the Bringer of Demise will be over with once and for all. So, lore justifications aside, why do people want this? Why is there a significant crowd hoping that Breath of the Wild 2 really does end the cycle? Well, there's a few obvious reasons. First off, some people just want change. Ganon was the villain of the first Zelda game in the 1980s, and he's still the primary villain now in the 2020s. Some people are simply growing tired of old Ganon and think it's time to retire him for a new villain. Others love the idea of retiring the cycle because of the opportunities that come from straying away from predetermined reincarnations. With no locked spirit of the hero, and Zelda not being reserved for the role of a Maiden of Hylia, maybe we could finally get that playable Zelda that many of us have wanted, or maybe female Link. All of those become a great deal more likely without any sort of curse being lifted. And by the way, we already got female Link and she is perfect, you guys are just mean. Then there are people who don't really care about the ramifications it would have on the series, but just love the idea of the curse being broken because of how dramatic it seems. Breath of the Wild is a game all about throwing off the yoke of tradition. Why not go even further in the sequel and kill the last thing holding the series to its past? That kind of thing is dramatic and exciting and could lead to a very intense and intriguing story. This is actually my favorite reason. I'm a big fan of tradition when it comes to video games, but I'm also a fan of a good and daring story. As long as it's done in a way that feels organic, not contrived or done for the sake of subverting expectations, it could be a really fantastic twist. To finish this video off, I want to talk about how I feel about this situation. Personally, I think it's an intriguing idea from a plot perspective, but overall I think it's outlandish and borderline comical to seriously think that Nintendo has any intention of retiring Ganondorf. First, however, I do want to talk about the idea as a plot device. The idea is fundamentally flawed, I think, because the idea of the reincarnation cycle itself is flawed. As QuestWithAaron talks about in his video, the Curse of Demise is something that's pretty widely misunderstood as a result of some questionable translation decisions made when Nintendo localized Skyward Sword. I really do suggest for you to watch Aaron's video. He explains it way better than I ever could, and it'll be the best 20 minutes you've spent on YouTube in a while. He gets right into the nitty-gritty of the actual Japanese text in a way that I am wholly incapable of. But the gist of it is that Demise makes frequent reference to a tribe or civilization of demons that he belongs to. His curse, as the translation calls it, isn't that he himself will reincarnate, but that the hatred and resentment that powers him and his demon tribe will eternally continue. The English version makes it seem like the curse is something new that hasn't been in place beforehand, and that Demise was now putting in place to get revenge on Link. Whereas the original Japanese seems to convey that the demon tribe will always come back, and that beating Demise at this moment was nothing to celebrate. This idea seems to have made it through to the English translation in some form though, namely through Fi's information on Demise. She refers to Demise as an eternal being, which implies he existed long before the events of Skyward Sword. and that he appeared in different forms to each person who saw him. This implies the process of reincarnation has been in place for a very long time, and it wasn't put in place just to spite Link after Skyward Sword. This seems to me then to say that Demise's curse isn't really a thing. There isn't a reincarnation cycle to break because it isn't something that's being willed by a malevolent being. Rather, it seems something more akin to fate as opposed to a curse that they can put an end to. So to put it simply, I don't really buy the idea of the curse being broken because I don't 100% believe that there is a curse to break. As interesting of an idea as it seems to have largely been an idea from the English localization team, as opposed to the Japanese writers who will be seeing to Breath of the Wild 2. Now let's talk about the idea of breaking the cycle, aside from the lore. In every one of these videos going over Breath of the Wild 2 fan theories, I've garnered a reputation of getting pretty snarky at some point in the video, and we've reached that point in this video. There is no chance that Nintendo would retire Ganon as a villain. It stands zero chance of happening, and it is astonishing to me that people think it is a possibility. At the very most, Breath of the Wild's incarnation of Ganon would be killed for good, but that would be the extent of it. Ganon is one of Nintendo's most popular villains. I don't have any data to prove this, but it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he was their most popular villain outside of a Mario game. Probably only really rivaled by King K. Rool and maybe King Dedede. And Nintendo has showed that they absolutely adore their legacy of characters. I think Ganon has about as much of a chance of being retired as Ridley or Bowser. He might miss a game, maybe even a few in a row, but he'll always be back, regardless of any curse, simply because he's a beloved villain. I also want to push back on the notion that he's overused, because he really isn't. There are 19 core Zelda titles, and Ganon has appeared as an actual boss in 10 of them. Even that is a generous number, considering he only appears in the Oracle games by linking them. He doesn't appear in the games individually. So 9 out of 19 is a more accurate number, but even if we take the 10, that means Ganondorf has appeared in a little over half of all Zelda games, 52% of them. That is hardly an overuse. Ganondorf, specifically in his humanoid form, has only appeared in 3 games and is mentioned in a 4th, Four Swords Adventures. To be clear, Vaati has the same amount of in-game appearances as Ganondorf, and you expect me to agree that he's overused? If you specifically think it is Pig or Beast Ganon that is overused, that's more of a reasonable opinion. But again, I'd point to that 52% number to signify that I disagree quite a bit. I'm sure that another game without Ganon as the main villain is on the horizon. They do make up about 1 in every 2 Zelda games after all, but it won't be because the reincarnation cycle is broken. After all, that concept doesn't really exist. It'll be because the Zelda team has always enjoyed experimenting with new villains, and that will probably always be true. But Ganon will be back. Not because of the Curse of Demise, but because he's a beloved villain and a fundamental part of the Legend of Zelda series. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, consider checking out some of my other Breath of the Wild Theory Judgment videos. We even have another one on Ganondorf. And once again, if you'd like to take part in the Subrosian Parade for the next video, you can do so over at my Patreon for $1 a month as of writing this video. Currently even cheaper for you American folks because the Canadian dollar is in the hole. As always, stay safe out there. Keep your eye open for any wayward demons and beckon Fi to you if you leave, because it's dangerous to go alone.